If you're so free, stop sending the money. Keep it and treat yourself. You don't do anything here anyway. You're just a freeloader. The word landed before the tray did. I was standing between the kitchen and the living room, holding a plate of lemon bars I'd baked because my grandson likes the sour kind with too much powdered sugar. My wrists ached from the weight, but I didn't put them down. The TV blared an episode of Shark Tank bright studio lights, a man waving his arms about profit margins, while my son laughed at something his wife whispered. No one looked at me. I could smell the citrus oil on my fingertips and the thin, clean sting of dish soap drying on my skin. Somewhere in the house, the washing machine clicked over and hummed. A small life thrummed all around me, and not a bit of it belonged to me. I didn't answer. I didn't ask who she meant by freeloader. I just stood there and tried to steady the tray as the sugar slid in slow motion across the plate. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. On the screen, one of the sharks said, "You're valuing the wrong thing," and the audience laughed. The timing was cruel enough to feel scripted. My son reached for the remote and turned up the volume a notch. "What?" he said over his shoulder, as if he hadn't heard what had come out of his own living room. As if a word like that could evaporate once it hit air. "Nothing," his wife said. She was scrolling on her phone, a foot tapped underneath her. "I'm just saying she doesn't have to fuss. We've got it." She smiled at him, the soft kind of smile you save for allies. Then she tilted her chin toward me. "Mom, you can just relax." Relax. The tray rattled once against my wedding band. I set it on the counter and pressed my palms flat to stop the shaking. Granulated sugar stuck to my skin. I kept thinking, stupidly, that I should wipe the counter before the powdered sugar turned to paste. That, and the lemon bars, would be ruined if no one ate them soon. Through the open window I heard the metal clank of the trash bin lid outside. The heavy kind with a spring that squeals a little when it opens. Another clank. Another. A rhythm. I knew that sound too well, the sound of something being decided for you. "What was that?" I asked, because it was easier than asking anything else. "Oh," my son said, not turning. I tossed that old laptop from the hall closet. "It's ancient, takes up space." "The silver one?" I felt my throat tighten on the question. "The one I used at Hamilton Freight?" "Mom." He laughed, gentle, indulgent. "That thing's a fossil. Keep up, okay?" his wife added without looking up. "It's not like you need it." It was ridiculous, the things a body can feel all at once. I felt the soap tighten on my hands, the sting at the shallow cut near my thumb where the zester had bit me that morning, the damp heat under my collarbone where the oven had breezed on me when I slid in the pan. Mostly I felt the room go shiny and far away, like I was watching my own house from behind a window that hadn't been cleaned in a long time. "I did need it," I said, but too quietly, more to the lemon bars than to either of them. I could see the dent on the left corner of that laptop even with my eyes closed, the way the letter E shined more than the others, because of how often I'd hit it in spreadsheets. E for Evelyn, E for earnings, E for everything I had counted and rounded and made stretch. My son muted the TV. The silence after the sharks cut off was enormous. "Mom, look," he said, softening his voice. "The voice you use for someone fragile. We've told you, you don't have to worry about money. You got it handled. You've done enough." He meant comfort. What leaked through was condescension. I watched his wife's mouth curve. It wasn't unkind. That was the worst part. It was the smile of someone who had already placed you in the correct box in the pantry and was proud of the organization. "I'm not worried," I said. That laptop had my files." "What files?" she asked, a laugh tapping the edge of the word. "Recipes?" The lemon bars blurred. I blinked hard and they came back into focus. Every grain of sugar brightened to a sting. "Budgets," I said. "Records. Old clients." "Sweetheart," she said to my son and then to me, "we live in the cloud now." In my head I stepped outside and lifted the trash lid and reached for it. In my head, my hands came away with black streaks, and the aluminum felt colder than it ever had on my lap, and I wiped it off on my shirt and clutched it to me the way you hold a baby leaving a hospital when you're certain you're doing everything wrong. In my head, I brought it back inside and set it on the counter and said, "That's not trash. That's 20 years of knowing where every penny goes. That's my shorthand with myself. That's my name." Instead, I dried my palms on a dish towel and said, "I'll take the trash out, because muscle memory is a powerful religion." I walked down the hall slowly, the towel still in my hand. The floorboards were clean. My work, every Thursday, so my feet didn't make any sound. My son called something after me, cheerful, like we were all just shuffling around on a Sunday afternoon. I didn't answer. The back door stuck the way it always had, and I lifted the handle before I pulled so the latch wouldn't scrape the frame. Little habits. 30 years of little habits. Outside, the air had that hot dust smell the yard gets when the sun sits on it too long. The lid was closed. I set the towel on the recycling bin and opened the trash. There it was. My old silver computer, face down on a black bag, its hinge bent just slightly wrong, like a shoulder after a long day. I reached in before I could think better of it. The plastic gave under my knees when I climbed up enough to lean over. A smear of something dark streaked my forearm. I didn't care. I slid the laptop out and hugged it against my chest. Something inside rattled. Maybe a screw. Maybe my pride. When I turned back, my son was standing in the doorway. "Mom," he said. "Not unkind, not kind either." "Come on, don't be like that." "What?" I asked. Dramatic. He glanced past me at the laptop, then at my shirt where the trash had left a mark. "It's just junk," I heard myself say very plainly. "It wasn't junk when it was busy feeding you." His face changed, something quick, like a child realizing a joke wasn't a joke. Then the showman's smile came back. "We didn't mean anything. Don't worry about it. Seriously." He opened the door wider, inviting me back into the curated cool of the house. The AC sighed. The room smelled like lemons and the artificial caramel of the candle his wife liked. I went inside. I washed my hands. I wiped down the laptop with the dish towel until the corner shone as much as it was going to. Then I set it on the far end of the counter, away from the lemon bars, like I was putting two old friends in the same room for the first time in years. On the muted TV, the Sharks argued without sound. My son's wife laughed at something on her phone and tucked her hair behind her ear with the same hand that had pointed at me a few minutes earlier. "Keep the money," she'd said, as if money were the point. I looked at the laptop. A thin hairline crack ran across the trackpad like a seam waiting to be stitched. I pressed it, and the screen blinked once, stubborn, and came to life. I didn't know it then, but I would remember that blink more than I remembered the word that cut me. Because that was the moment a small, old thing decided it would not die. Later, when people asked me when everything changed, I didn't mention the lemon bars or the TV show or the trash lid. I told them the truth, which sounds like philosophy but felt like a bruise you can touch. That was the day I understood this. People don't just throw away objects. They throw away their own values the moment they think they're rich enough to forget gratitude. I used to be the head accountant at a mid-sized freight company off the I-95. 18 years of balance sheets, payrolls, and the faint perfume of diesel that clung to every invoice I filed. Numbers were my language, the keyboard, my pulse. When my first grandson was born, I decided to retire early. People called it a noble choice. Family first, that's sweet, Evelyn. No one said dangerous. I sold my small share in the company. $230,000. The sum total of nearly 2 decades of loyalty, and skipped vacations. I transferred it straight into my son's account. "Use it to build something of your own," I told him. "Mom, that's too much. You'll need capital. Think of it as an investment in our family." He smiled, the proud, shiny smile of a man about to conquer the world. I thought I saw my late husband's grin in that moment, the same wayward confidence that used to both thrill and exhaust me. I didn't know then that confidence without gratitude turns into a weapon. For the first few months, everything felt worth it. The house buzzed with plans. New business cards, the smell of printer ink, spreadsheets full of projected profits. They needed someone to babysit, to cook, to keep things running while they worked. And I was good at keeping things running. So I packed up my own apartment, sold the car I loved, and moved into their guest room, a soft-lit space with white curtains and no locks on the drawers. I told myself it was temporary, just until their company took off. I woke at 6 every morning. I'd brew coffee for 3, fold laundry before the baby woke, answer phone calls from suppliers while stirring oatmeal with the other hand. I kept receipts in color-coded folders, blue for household, yellow for the company. The work felt familiar. I was still balancing accounts, only now the numbers were bottles of milk, utilities, and medical copays. Once, when the company's client payment was delayed, I used $5,000 from my savings to cover their rent. My son promised to repay me in 2 weeks. It took 8 months. I didn't press him. I told myself families don't need contracts. At night, after the dishes were done and the house finally quieted, I'd open my silver laptop, the same one I'd carried to the freight office for years. Its edges were rubbed smooth from travel. The letter E was worn to a faint shadow. It still hummed a steady rhythm when I typed. That computer was the last thing that still felt mine. On its desktop lived every version of my old life. Tax statements, salary ledgers, a spreadsheet titled Earnings Final Year, and a photo of me and my old crew at the office Christmas party, our eyes glassy from cheap champagne. I'd scroll through those files sometimes the way people scroll through old love letters, not for the content, but for the proof that someone once needed you for your mind. 3 years passed that way. Every morning, I gave a little more. Every night, I took a little less space. Mom, don't worry about the bills, okay? We've got it handled. I know, sweetheart, I'd reply, because faith sounds gentler than doubt. When they bought the new house, I used my remaining savings, $42,000, to help with the down payment. My name wasn't on the deed. I didn't ask for it to be. It felt petty at the time to talk about ownership when you're living under the same roof as your grandchildren. The house was beautiful, gleaming wood floors, a kitchen island big enough to roll out pie crusts on. I remember standing there the first week, barefoot on the new tile, feeling proud. The smell of varnish and fresh paint mixed with roasted coffee beans. I thought, this is what success smells like. But as months folded into years, that scent changed. The coffee turned bitter from overuse, the wood floors dulled under the scrape of toy trucks. My son's tone shifted to less gratitude, more command. Mom, can you run to Costco again? Mom, the nanny canceled. Can you stay home today? Mom, don't touch the QuickBooks file. We've got it handled. He said we, and I began to disappear inside that word. Sometimes, I'd sit on the porch at dusk, balancing my own checkbook in the fading light. There wasn't much to balance anymore. Just my modest pension, the bills I paid for groceries. I'd run my finger along the laptop's cool metal surface and whisper, "At least you still remember me." One evening, I overheard them in the kitchen, whispering about money. The walls in that house carried sound like secrets through a vent. Mom keeps asking about the investment statements, my son said. She's just bored, his wife answered. You know how old people get. Let her think she's helping. The phrase stung worse than any argument. Old people. Like a category you fall into without permission. I could have confronted them, but confrontation requires the belief that someone cares about your side of the story. I wasn't sure they did anymore. Instead, I doubled down on being useful. I packed lunches with little notes, fixed the leaking faucet myself, polished the silverware before dinner parties. At night, I balanced the household account to the cent, though no one asked me to. I thought if I kept proving my worth, maybe they'd see me again. But worth doesn't register in a ledger someone else refuses to open. The more I helped, the more invisible I became. My son's friends called me sweet old Evelyn, like I was part of the furniture. His wife started introducing me as my mother-in-law who stays with us, never lives with us. That one word difference carved a trench between belonging and borrowing. There was one afternoon that stays with me. I was updating a spreadsheet of household expenses when my grandson, all curls and peanut butter fingers, toddled over and pressed a sticker on the corner of my laptop. A blue star. "Grandma's computer," he said proudly. "Yes," I whispered, tracing the sticker. "Grandma's." He laughed and ran off, and I stared at that little star until the light changed. It felt like a flag marking a country no one else believed existed anymore. That night, when I powered the laptop down, the hum lingered a second too long before the screen went black. I remember thinking, even machines don't let go easily. It would keep working for years after that, faithful like muscle memory. I used it to track the mortgage payments, the car lease, the tuition plan. I was still the accountant of the family, though no one called me that, until the day they threw it away. The day they called me a freeloader. And in that single word, all those numbers, $230,000, 18 years, 3 lifetimes of service, vanished like entries deleted from a sheet. Back then, the silver laptop was still warm under my hands, still the one tool I had left to make sense of the world. I didn't realize how fragile that warmth was, how easily people decide an object or a person is obsolete. Later, I would understand that computer wasn't just metal and circuits. It was the last calculator of my dignity. The one thing that could still tally up the quiet cost of loving people who mistake devotion for dependence. I remember my younger years by sound. The clatter of keyboards in a small office lit by fluorescent hum. The hiss of the coffee pot that never quite shut off. The rhythm of my fingers against the number pad like a metronome keeping time for survival. There were nights when I typed until my fingertips split at the edges, little crescents of skin lifting like paper cuts. I'd wrap them in tape, finish the report, and blow gently on the keys so the sweat wouldn't stick. We didn't have air conditioning then, just a ceiling fan that complained in circles above me. I was 28 when I gave birth to my son. I worked until the day before the contractions started. The office manager brought me flowers that wilted in the heat before noon, and the dispatcher told me, "Don't lift anything heavier than a calculator." That night, I carried home 2 boxes of payroll files. I worked from the hospital room too after he was born, while he slept beside me, pink-faced and new. My husband had taken a second job driving trucks at night, and money was a patient that couldn't afford rest. The laptop didn't exist then. It was a beige desktop that purred louder than the baby monitor. Still, the glow of its screen was the same soft blue that would later fill my nights. Numbers soothed me. They obeyed rules. 2 + 2 never woke you at 3 a.m. to ask why you weren't enough. When my son turned 5, he liked to sit on my lap while I typed. His small fingers hovered over mine, pressing random keys, filling the document with nonsense symbols. "That's code," I told him once, and he believed me completely. "Are you a code breaker, Mom?" he asked. "Something like that," I said, smiling. At 10, he stopped sitting on my lap but still came into my office before bed. One night, he stood in the doorway in his Spider-Man pajamas, watching me work. "You're always typing," he said. "It's how I make sure the world keeps spinning." He looked serious for a moment, the way children sometimes do when they hear truth by accident. Then he said the sentence that stayed with me for decades. "You're really good at this. When I grow up, I'll buy you your own office, one where you don't have to share with anyone." I laughed, heart swelling so fast it hurt. "You promise?" "Promise," he said, and crossed his heart with a sticky popsicle finger. I should have known childhood promises melt faster than popsicles. Years later, I thought of that night while folding his business shirts, the starch biting at my fingers in the same spots where the keyboard once did. I'd traded the rhythm of numbers for the rhythm of a washing machine. Both made the same endless circular sound. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the kitchen window and see the ghost of that young woman still typing somewhere in a different time zone, still believing hard work earned safety, that love repaid itself in gratitude. I kept the same ritual, even after retirement. A cup of instant coffee at 10 p.m. My silver laptop open, columns of numbers glowing quietly in the dark. It was my small rebellion against the idea that age meant idleness. When the house slept, I'd balance their accounts the way I used to balance my company's books. Precise, careful, invisible. I never sent an invoice for it. "You don't bill your own family," I told myself. But I think, deep down, I was waiting for something as simple as that childhood promise. Someone to say, "You're good at this, Mom. You matter." Now, years later, I realized that moment. The boy in the doorway, his voice full of belief, was the last time I felt entirely seen. After that, the recognition faded slowly, like an old spreadsheet losing color. Cell by cell, year by year, until one day I looked up and realized I'd been working in the dark all along. And that little boy who once wanted to buy me an office? He grew up, built one of his own, and forgot I ever needed a desk. After I left my job, my daughter-in-law began managing what she called our household account. It sounded sensible at first. She worked in marketing, knew all the apps. "Let me simplify things for you, Mom," she said, typing passwords faster than I could blink. "Up, everything will be automatic. You won't have to worry about bills anymore." I didn't realize that automatic was another word for invisible. The first small unease came on a Tuesday morning. I'd gone online to check a routine transfer from my pension, something I'd done every month for years. The login screen said access denied. When I asked about it over dinner, she smiled, patient and professional. "Oh, I changed the security settings. Too many spam emails lately. Don't worry, I'll handle it." She reached over, poured me more wine before I could speak. My son was scrolling through his phone, nodding along to a rhythm only he could hear. I told myself not to fuss. I'd always hated confrontation. It never solved anything. A week later, while I was cleaning the living room, I heard her voice drifting from the patio. She was on the phone with a friend. I wasn't trying to listen, but certain words have a way of finding you even through glass. "No, she really thinks the money's still hers," she said, laughing softly. Bless her heart. She's sweet, but stuck in the past. There was a pause, a sip of something through a straw, and then, "It's kind of funny, honestly. Like she believes in fairy tales about family investments." The words hit harder than I expected. I was standing by the sofa with a dustcloth in my hand, frozen in a half gesture, staring at the reflection of my own face in the dark TV screen. I could see the movement of her lips in the window's glare, the tilt of her head as she listened to her friend's reply, the way she smiled as if what she was saying were harmless. I told myself I'd misheard. Maybe she meant someone else's mother. She was joking. The mind, when frightened, is quick to rewrite dialogue. That night, I baked too many cookies, my old defense against dread. My son came home late, kissed the top of my head distractedly, and said, "You spoil us, Mom." I smiled, as if sugar could disguise suspicion. The next day I asked, carefully, "Could you show me the bank app again? I'd like to understand how it works." My daughter-in-law looked up from her laptop. "Oh, it's complicated," she said lightly. "Don't stress yourself. I'll send you a summary each month." She never did. The house grew quieter around those small omissions. Every tap of my calculator sounded too loud. I started to notice tiny changes: mail that no longer came addressed to me, subscription emails that stopped arriving, the credit card bill that was suddenly paperless. When I mentioned it, my son waved it off. "We're just modernizing, Mom. Paper is old school." One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found a printed statement tucked between towels. It wasn't mine, but the numbers were familiar round figures that looked eerily like the ones I'd once transferred to them. Half of it was gone, moved to another account I didn't recognize. Gah! I stood there, holding the towel like a flag of surrender. The ceiling fans spun lazily above me, indifferent. I could have marched into the kitchen, confronted them both. Instead, I slid the paper back where I'd found it. Because admitting what I'd seen meant admitting how foolish I'd been. That evening, I sat at the table, stirring my tea long after it cooled. My daughter-in-law laughed at something on her phone. My son asked if I wanted to join them for a movie. I said no, claiming a headache. The truth was smaller and meaner. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Later, as I lay awake, I thought of the way she'd said funny. There's a cruelty in that kind of amusement. So polished, it passes for affection. I turned toward the wall, the glow from the hallway spilling through the crack of the door. I told myself again, maybe I heard it wrong, but even in the dark, I could feel the first chill settle in, quiet and certain, like frost forming on glass. Because the kindest people are always the ones who mishear. They need to believe goodness is still possible. It was supposed to be a party. Balloons sagged from the ceiling in shades of baby blue and silver, the kind you order in bulk online. A banner hung across the window. "Happy 4th birthday, Caleb." The smell of pizza and frosting mixed with the faint tang of wine in crystal glasses. Music from some children's playlist chimed tinnily from a Bluetooth speaker, off-key and too cheerful. I came in through the back door carrying the cake I'd baked. 3 layers, lemon cream between, the same flavor my grandson had once called sunshine cake. I'd piped little stars along the edges the way my own mother had done for me. My wrists ached from steadying it all the way over in the car. "Put it," I started to say, but my daughter-in-law intercepted me at the kitchen island, palms raised like a traffic officer. "Oh, Mom, you don't need to fuss," she said, her voice sweetened for the guests. "We've already got a cake from the bakery." Tiered, with his favorite cartoon on top. I hesitated, the weight of the box shifting in my arms. Around us, people in bright clothes milled, chatting. My son was by the grill outside, laughing loudly, a beer raised in salute to someone. No one looked at me. "It's just homemade," I murmured. She smiled. "Thin, practiced. We're all set. Really. Well, no, just leave it over there." She gestured toward a far counter already cluttered with paper plates, unopened soda bottles, and a stack of napkins. A kind of limbo for things not meant to be seen. I set the cake down carefully. My hands smelled of lemon zest and dish soap. The sugar stars blurred for a moment before my eyes. I blinked them back into focus. From the corner of my ear I heard her lean toward one of her friends, someone with perfect nails holding a mimosa, and whisper, low but not low enough, "She's always here, isn't she? Must be so bored hanging around all day. Total freeloader." There was a quick hiss of laughter, the kind you share over someone's head. My body reacted before my mind did. The stem of the wineglass in my hand trembled. Red sloshed over the rim and onto my dress, a slow blooming stain down the front like a dark flower opening. Warm liquid, sticky on my thigh. "Yeah, oh no, Mom, careful," she said brightly, snatching a napkin from the counter and dabbing at the spill. Her friend turned away, hiding a smile behind her drink. "I'm fine," I said, but my voice came out thin. My son poked his head in, saw only the spill, and laughed. "Party foul, Mom?" Then he was gone again, back to his friends and the smoke of the grill. I stood there for a long second with the napkin in my hand, watching the red spread across the pale fabric of my dress. It was my favorite dress, cream-colored with tiny blue dots. I'd worn it to my own retirement party years ago, back when a room full of people clapped for me. The stain looked like an accusation, like something you couldn't explain away. All around me the party continued. A child squealed as someone blew up a balloon, forks clinked against plates, a cartoon theme song played its tinny loop. My grandson ran past with icing on his cheeks, shouting, "Grandma! Grandma!" but was swept away by another adult before he could reach me. I tried to smile, tried to straighten the napkin over the stain. My hands were steady again, but my chest felt hollow, like someone had knocked the air out of me. I thought of the cake on the counter, untouched, a small sun going cold under plastic wrap. My daughter-in-law was already back at the island, arranging cupcakes on a tiered stand, laughing softly with her friend as if nothing had happened. I could have said something. I could have slammed the wineglass down, pointed at the cake, demanded respect. But the words lodged somewhere behind my teeth. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears, fast and hard. So I did what I'd trained myself to do over years of quiet service. I smiled faintly and stepped back. I found a damp towel, went into the guest bathroom, and dabbed at the stain until the water ran pink. The fabric smelled like iron and sugar. When I came back, no one had noticed I'd left. The cake was still sitting on the counter, its sugar stars melting under the heat of the room. Someone behind me laughed again. Sharp, high, brief. It wasn't meant for me, but it might as well have been. In that moment, under the hum of helium balloons and the smell of buttercream, something in me shifted. Not a snap, more like a burial. I felt myself folding the last fragile piece of dignity down into a small, quiet place where no one could touch it. They didn't see it. They didn't even pause. They didn't know that, in their laughter, I had just buried the last of my self-respect. That night, the house was silent in the way only expensive houses can be. Thick walls, humming appliances, a silence padded with comfort. You didn't pay for yourself. The party glitter had been swept away, the sink empty. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in the stained dress, staring at my hands. They smelled faintly of lemon and wine, of things meant to be celebratory. On the nightstand sat the folded napkin I'd used to blot the spill. Red had dried into a brown halo, like a bruise that decided to stay. I don't know what made me move. Maybe the sound of the garbage truck braking 2 streets away, its metal clank like a dare. I slipped on my shoes, found a flashlight, and stepped out into the cold. The bins waited by the curb. Moonlight caught the edge of aluminum, a dull gleam. The lid was heavier than I remembered. When I lifted it, the smell of plastic and wet paper rose up, ordinary and humiliating. And there it was, my old silver laptop, half buried under cardboard and the wilted remains of party decorations. I hesitated for a second, glancing back at the house. All dark. No one watching. Then I reached in. The plastic rustled, something sharp snagged my sleeve, but I pulled it free. The screen had a spider crack from corner to corner, the kind that looked like lightning frozen in place. I pressed the power button out of habit, expecting nothing. The screen flickered, dim, stubborn, and glowed. It was alive. The sight of that faint blue light nearly undid me. I stood there in the driveway, wind in my hair, holding that wounded machine like it was a living thing. I carried it back inside, wiped it down with an old t-shirt, and sat at the kitchen table. The digital clock on the stove read 12:47 a.m. I hadn't logged into my work email in years. My fingers trembled as I typed the password. The familiar interface bloomed on the screen, names, folders, the ghosts of old clients still archived neatly by quarter. For a moment, I was back in that freight office with the smell of coffee and toner and oil on the wind. One folder caught my eye. Independent contractors. Pending. I opened it and stared. My name was still listed on 3 small companies' vendor rosters, inactive but not deleted. I could still log hours. I hesitated. Fear has a way of making you sentimental about cages. You start believing you're safer inside. I whispered aloud, as if the machine needed convincing. What's the worst that could happen? I already lost everything polite. So I opened a new message. Subject: Returning Consultant Availability. Dear Mr. Wallace, this is Evelyn Grant. I worked with your team several years ago as a senior accountant at Hamilton Freight. I've recently reopened my practice as an independent consultant and would love to assist with any upcoming audits or reconciliation work. Best, Evelyn Grant. When I hit send, the sound was small but seismic. I sent 2 more. Then, on impulse, I updated my resume template, deleted the words retired, replaced them with freelance accounting specialist. It felt indecent, like lying about my age on a dating profile, and yet my heart beat faster than it had in months. I opened a new spreadsheet next, mostly to see if I still remembered how. The formulas came back easily, muscle memory flowing through my fingertips. The screen glowed a little brighter, as if it recognized me too. Outside, the garbage truck roared closer, its lights sweeping through the blinds. For a wild second, I imagined them coming for the laptop again, hauling it away to be crushed. I shut the lid protectively. In the hush that followed, I laughed. A dry, startled sound that scared me a little. It wasn't joy exactly, more like defiance finally finding its voice. I brewed coffee, strong and black, the way I used to when deadlines bled into dawn. A bitterness steadied me. I opened a clean notebook and wrote down everything I could remember about old clients, old colleagues, anyone who might still take my call. Each name felt like a candle lit against the dark. By 3 a.m. I had a plan. Not a good one, not even a sensible one, but mine. I backed up files to a flash drive, created a new Gmail address, and looked up freelance job boards. Most listings wanted applicants under 40, fluent in software I'd never heard of. Still, I applied to 5. I used the same words I used to type for others, the same phrasing that once sold other people's value. This time, it was mine. When I finally leaned back, the eastern sky had turned pale. I hadn't felt this kind of exhaustion, the satisfying kind, in years. In the reflection of the dark window, I could just make out the shape of my face lit by the laptop glow. Older, yes, softer at the edges. But the same woman who'd once kept a company from sinking under bad math was still there, fingers on the keys, alive. People always tell you not to dig through the past, that what's gone is gone, that dignity means leaving things buried, but dignity, I think, has never paid a bill. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty in the wreckage to find what still works. And that night, kneeling by the trash, I found more than a cracked machine. People say don't dig into the past, but sometimes it's in the garbage others throw away that I find the future they never saw coming. I didn't say a word after that night. Silence, I'd learned, was safer than explanation. It didn't invite correction. So I let my days unfold as usual, cooking breakfast, watering the plants, pretending not to notice that the mail no longer came addressed to me. But when the house fell quiet, when dishes dried in the rack and everyone else went to bed, I'd open the laptop. The screen glowed against the dark kitchen, the only light left awake in that house. I taught myself new software. QuickBooks updates, cloud invoicing, even a payroll program with a dashboard full of colors I didn't understand. The tutorials were narrated by cheerful young voices who said things like, "It's easy," and "anyone can do it." I muttered replies like, "We'll see about that," and kept typing. At first, my hands shook. They weren't used to moving this fast. The bones in my wrists ached the way they did after a long shift years ago. But it was a good ache, the kind that reminded you your muscles still remembered how to work. The days were long, the nights were longer. I drank too much coffee, the kind that leaves a sour taste in your stomach and your heart thudding like a warning. Still, I didn't stop. Each new skill was a small rebellion, a quiet undoing of the version of me they'd chosen to believe in. A week later, my daughter-in-law noticed the light under the kitchen door around midnight. The next morning, she asked, "Mom, were you up again last night? You should rest. Staring at screens isn't good for you at your age." I smiled over my cup of tea. "I'll sleep when I'm done learning." She laughed, a short sound, half disbelief, half dismissal. 2 nights later, my son walked in while I was working at the counter, the hum of the fridge the only sound between us. He stood there for a moment looking at the cracked screen, at my fingers moving across it like I still belonged in a world of numbers. "Me," he said softly. "What are you even doing?" "Practicing." "For what?" I didn't look up. "For myself," he exhaled, long and tired. "You don't have to prove anything. You can just relax." I turned to him, smiling the same calm smile I used to give auditors when they underestimated me. "I'm not proving. I'm remembering." He didn't like that answer. He scratched his head, muttered something about wasting electricity, and went back upstairs. The floorboards groaned under his steps, slow, irritated. That was the first crack in the peace of the house. After that, I felt their eyes on me more often. My daughter-in-law began lingering near the kitchen in the evenings, folding laundry that didn't need folding, watching as if I were a child left unsupervised near matches. "You should go to bed earlier," she said once. "Older people need sleep." I just nodded. Maybe that's why I'm still awake. And not that old yet. The next morning, my coffee mug was missing from its usual spot. I found it later, tucked behind the cleaning supplies under the sink. A message so petty, it was almost funny. He didn't mention it. I kept working. Each night, the air in the house grew thicker. Our conversations shortened. My grandson started whispering when he played nearby, as if laughter had become inappropriate. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum more cautiously. They started going out more dinners, gatherings, errands that lasted until midnight. When they came home, the smell of wine followed them, along with the sharp tone of conspiratorial voices lowering just before I entered the room. I made more coffee. I kept learning. Sometimes I'd pause mid-lesson, staring at the cursor blinking in the search bar. The glow of the screen reflected faintly on the window, turning my reflection ghostly. Behind me, the hallway yawned open, quiet and dark, like a throat holding its breath. That's what the house felt like now. A lung full of air it didn't know what to do with. One night, the rain finally came. The sound against the roof was relentless, rhythmic, 1,000 fingers drumming at once. I worked through it, typing formulas while thunder rolled in the distance. From upstairs, I heard my son's voice. Sharp, then muffled. A door shut hard. Maybe they were arguing about me, maybe not. I didn't care. I kept typing until the storm's rhythm matched my own heartbeat. When the rain slowed, I closed the laptop. The screen dimmed, leaving a faint afterglow on the counter, like a held breath finally released. The next morning, I came down to find both of them at the table, coffee cups untouched. The silence was so heavy it could have tipped the mugs over. My son looked up. "Mom," he began, too casually, "we need to talk." And just like that, I knew the storm hadn't ended. It was only gathering strength, waiting to break. The air in that house was so thick you could almost see it move. Quiet, swollen, full of lightning that hadn't struck yet. The morning it happened was deceptively beautiful. Sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor. The smell of toast. A breeze sneaking through the half-open window. I was stirring coffee, watching the steam curl up like a slow confession, when I heard the knock. 3 polite taps on my door. I already knew that kind of knock. Practiced, rehearsed, the kind people use when they're about to ask for something they have no right to. "Come in," I said. My son stepped inside, crisp in his blue shirt, tie loosened, phone in hand. He smiled the way people do before giving bad news, lips polite, eyes darting. Behind him, my daughter-in-law hovered near the hallway, pretending to check her watch. "Mom," he began, easing into the tone he used on clients. "I've been meaning to talk to you. It's just paperwork stuff, nothing serious." I kept stirring. "Paperwork," I repeated. That's my favorite word. He hesitated, then placed a neat stack of documents on the table. A pen rested on top like a loaded weapon. "It's a power of attorney form," he said quickly. "Their convenience makes it easier to handle the house and bank stuff on your behalf. Taxes, insurance, those kinds of things." I looked at the papers. My name sat there, printed neatly above a dotted line. Beside it, financial authority transfer. "For convenience," I echoed. He nodded. "You know how complicated banking gets. We're just streamlining things." "And if I don't sign?" The smile faltered. "Mom, come on. Don't make this difficult." "I'm just asking." He exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temple. "Then I'll have to take legal steps. The house is technically joint property. I could file a petition just to clarify ownership. It's not a threat, okay? It's procedure." I set the spoon down. The sound of metal against porcelain was louder than it should have been. "Procedure," I said softly. "So you're saying, if I don't sign away what's left of my name on paper, you'll sue me?" He swallowed. "Don't make it sound ugly, Mom." "Ugly," I repeated. "That's one word for it." Or the room had gone still. Even the clock seemed to pause. I looked up at him. This man I'd once carried to the hospital with a fever of 104? This man whose college tuition I'd paid when the bank refused the loan? This man who used to say I was his hero? Now standing in front of me with legal jargon where gratitude used to be. "What would you tell the judge?" I asked quietly. "That your mother's unreasonable? That she won't give you access to the money she earned before you could spell your name?" "Mom." "No, really, I'm curious. What story will you sell?" He shifted, the tie now looking like a leash. "I'm just trying to protect the family assets," he said. "Holiday. Protect them from who?" He didn't answer. From the corner of my eye, I saw my daughter-in-law step closer. She tossed a keyring onto the table. It clattered against the documents, sharp and final. "Enough," she said. "You've been living here rent-free for years. We've covered utilities, groceries, everything. You don't get to act like a victim now. Sign the papers or stop pretending this is your house." I turned toward her. Pretending? She crossed her arms, chin high. You heard me. Something inside me went very still. The kind of stillness that isn't calm. It's calculation. I folded the papers once, then twice, until they formed a tight rectangle. I set them aside and looked at my son. If you want to file a case, I said evenly, go ahead. But make sure you tell the court who paid your tuition, your down payment, and your wedding caterer. And while you're at it, tell them who wired the first 2 years of seed money for your company. I'll wait for the subpoena. Mom? And one more thing, I added, my voice steady as the tick of the clock. When you call your lawyer, remember to tell him you'll be paying his retainer with the credit card that's still under my name. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. He opened his mouth, closed it again. My daughter-in-law's face had gone pale beneath the makeup. Finally, she hissed, You're unbelievable. You act all generous, but you've been manipulating us the whole time. You're a bitter old woman who can't stand not being in control. I smiled, slow and tired. Maybe. But at least I can still do math, and I know exactly how much interest I've earned on your contempt. Her eyes flashed. She turned sharply, muttering, God, you're impossible, and stormed out of the room. My son stayed. He stared at the table, then at me. His voice cracked a little when he said, Why are you doing this, Mom? You're forcing me into a corner. Oh, I said softly, you built that corner yourself. I just stopped standing in it. He looked older in that moment, like a man realizing the hero of his story might not have been him. When he finally left, the papers remained on the table, still folded. I could hear the front door slam, the car engine start, then fade down the street. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the refrigerator hum, the clock resume its rhythm. My coffee had gone cold, a thin film forming on the surface. I didn't drink it. Instead, I reached for the laptop. The screen glowed to life, the crack across it catching the morning light. I opened a blank spreadsheet and typed at the top, Evelyn Grant. Accounts to close. Then, one by one, I began listing every joint account, every automatic transfer, every credit card still tethered to their names. By noon, I had closed 3. By evening, 6. Each click of confirm felt like a small, deliberate heartbeat. When they came home that night, no one spoke to me. My daughter-in-law's heels struck the floor like gunfire. My son didn't look my way, but I caught the flicker of panic in their whispers when the bank notifications started pinging their phones. I turned up the volume on the radio, humming along to a song I didn't know. Later, as I washed the coffee mug, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, the faint outline of an older woman with tired eyes but steady hands. Behind her, the house glowed with all its polished surfaces, all its pretense of peace. I dried my hands, turned off the light, and smiled. The war had already begun. You can call me bitter. Call me cruel. Call me a freeloader if it makes you feel rich, I whispered to the empty room. But remember this. I know the value of everything you've taken. And I know exactly how to collect. They moved faster than I expected. It began quietly, as all poisonous things do, with whispers. A neighbor who used to wave from her porch suddenly avoided eye contact. The mailman stopped chatting about the weather. One morning, I found the local church bulletin in my mailbox, folded to a page about help for seniors in mental decline. No note, just that. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then came the phone calls I wasn't supposed to hear. My daughter-in-law. Her voice soft and pitying. It's just sad, really. She's confused lately. Keeps saying she worked at some company, thinks she still has clients. Poor thing doesn't know what she's talking about. I stood in the hallway, frozen, one hand on the wall. That hallway had heard every stage of my life. Laughter, lullabies, fights. And now it carried this, a quiet rewriting of me. By the end of the week, I'd become a story. Mrs. Grant, the poor old woman losing her mind. Mrs. Grant, who refuses to sign over her house because she thinks everyone's out to steal it. Mrs. Grant, who talks to her computer. When my friend Helen called, her voice was hesitant. Evelyn, honey, people are saying strange things. Are you all right? I laughed because what else was there to do? If being sane means giving away everything you worked for, I said, then yes, I must be out of my mind. She didn't know whether to laugh with me or not. I didn't blame her. The rumor had already done its job. It made everyone second-guess my version of reality. A few days later, a woman from the homeowners association knocked on the door. She wore the smile of someone performing a civic duty. "Not just checking in, Mrs. Grant," she said. "We heard you've been struggling. If you need help managing your affairs, there are programs." "I'm managing fine," I interrupted. Her eyes flicked over my shoulder toward the kitchen, where my old laptop sat open. The cracked screen reflected her face, fractured and multiplied. She looked unsettled. "Well," she said, stepping back, "if you need someone to talk to." "I already have someone," I said, and closed the door gently. That night, I packed a small suitcase. I didn't slam drawers or stomp my feet, just folded things: 2 pairs of slacks, 3 blouses, my old calculator, the silver laptop wrapped in a sweater. When I told my son I was moving out, he blinked like he hadn't heard me correctly. "Mom, don't be ridiculous," he said. "Where would you even go?" "Somewhere quieter." He exchanged a quick look with his wife. "You're overreacting." "Probably," I said. "But even lunatics need fresh air." I left the next morning. The house looked spotless when I closed the door, like no one had ever lived there, like I'd been erased already. I found a small apartment above a florist shop on the edge of town. It smelled faintly of earth and roses, even in winter. The landlord, a kind man with arthritis, didn't ask questions. He just handed me the keys and said, "It's yours if you want it." I wanted it. The first night there, I set up the laptop on the tiny kitchen table. The screen blinked to life, stubborn and bright against the dark. It looked ridiculous in that cramped space, a relic in a room that didn't yet know me. But it was mine. I made instant coffee and opened my email. To my surprise, there were replies waiting. 2 of the companies I'd contacted had written back. Polite, cautious, but interested. "Hi, Evelyn. Great to hear from you again. We might have a small contract if you're available next quarter." I read the message twice. Then 3 times. My hands trembled, not from age but from adrenaline. Work. Real work. The next morning, I took the bus to the library. The librarian, a young woman with pink hair and kind eyes, helped me print forms and scan my ID. She didn't treat me like I was confused or fragile. She treated me like a person with a purpose. I could have cried from the shock of it. Within a week, I had my first client. A small freight company out of Baltimore. Poetic symmetry, really. They needed part-time accounting help. Remote. Flexible hours. I bought a new mouse, a headset, and a potted fern to sit beside the laptop. The plant thrived on neglect. Perfect company. But back in the neighborhood I'd left, my name kept traveling. My daughter-in-law called once, her tone dripping concern. "Mom, we heard you're working again." "That's great. Just be careful, okay? You don't want people taking advantage of you." "Don't worry," I said. "I've already met the experts." She didn't call again. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. A formal notice from a law firm representing my son. They wanted to review the status of shared assets and ensure financial stability given recent cognitive concerns. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. They were clever, I'd give them that. If they could prove I was incompetent, they could seize control of everything. For a moment, fear pressed against my ribs. What if they succeeded? What if a judge believed them? All it took was one story told often enough. Then I looked at the laptop. The crack across the screen gleamed like a scar in the light. I whispered to it, "We've been through worse, haven't we?" And so I began to plan. I started keeping a record of everything: emails, texts, timestamps, conversations half overheard. Each night, I organized the data into folders named Insurance, Investments, Communications. Numbers, facts, patterns, cold things, but honest ones. When I felt lonely, I'd open the spreadsheet of my first client and lose myself in the comfort of balanced columns. One afternoon, as I was entering invoices, a notification pinged. An unfamiliar address. Mrs. Grant, I heard you're freelancing again. A friend of mine recommended you. Are you available for a short-term project? The signature read, Janet Walters, Financial Auditor, Maryland Tax Bureau. I blinked. Someone had noticed. Someone legitimate. I typed back, yes, I'm available. That night, rain beat softly against the window and I smiled to myself. Let them call me senile. Let them whisper. Because while they were busy painting me as unfit, I was building something stronger than their lies. A record, a paper trail, a map of truth. When my friend Helen called again to check on me, she said, Evelyn, I'm sorry I doubted you. I saw your name on a consulting site. You're working? Yes, I said. And it's going beautifully. She laughed. You sound better than ever. I am, I said. Turns out, madness looks good on me. She didn't understand, but that was all right. And everyone needed to. By the time I hung up, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet roses from the shop below. I turned back to my laptop, fingers steady on the keyboard. The world thought I was losing my mind. But what they didn't realize was that I was reclaiming it bit by bit, line by line, until the numbers finally made sense again. And through it all, that old machine stayed beside me, cracked but faithful, glowing like a small, defiant heart. They said I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But at least now, every thought I lost had a receipt to prove where it went. It happened by accident like most betrayals. You're not meant to find out about. It was nearly midnight. The florist shop below my apartment had long gone dark, and the air carried the faint sweetness of wilted roses. I was finishing a client's quarterly report when my inbox chimed. The sender's name made my stomach tighten. Michael Grant. My son. The subject line read, Easry Property Paperwork. At first, I thought it was a mistake. He must have meant to send it to his lawyer or his wife. Still, curiosity won. I clicked. Inside was a thread of emails, at least 6 of them, between my son, his wife, and a man named Patrick Hale, attorney at law. I began reading, eyes narrowing with each line. From Patrick Hale. If we proceed with the incapacity claim, the court will likely grant financial guardianship within 60 days. You'll need a notarized medical letter confirming cognitive decline. From Sarah Grant. We can use Dr. Ruff. McKinley's evaluation from last year. She's already complained about memory issues. Perfect leverage. From Michael Grant. Once that's approved, we can transfer the deed. She'll fight it, but it won't matter if she's declared incompetent. The cursor blinked at the end of the thread. Patient, merciless. For a moment, the world went silent. The refrigerator stopped humming. Even the old clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. I read the email again, slower this time, tracing each word as though understanding them differently might change their meaning. But no. There it was, plain as arithmetic. My own son, plotting to strip me of the last thing that was legally mine. My name on the deed. They wanted me erased. I sat back in my chair, feeling my pulse thud through my fingers. I waited for the wave of panic I expected. The old, familiar kind that freezes your spine. But it didn't come. What came instead was something quieter. Colder. Clarity. I stared at the cracked screen, the way the jagged line of damage split the email in two. On one side, the people I used to love. On the other, the person I had to become. I took a slow breath, then opened a new folder on my desktop. Legal evidence. One by one, I saved each email as a PDF. I backed them up to a flash drive. Then another. I printed hard copies at the library the next morning and sealed them in an envelope. At the bottom of the final printout, I added a note in blue ink, forwarded accidentally by sender. Then I sat at my tiny kitchen table, coffee growing cold, and dialed a number I hadn't used in 15 years. Evelyn Grant, a sleepy voice answered on the second ring. Robert, I said. It's been a while. He paused. Evelyn? My God. It must be, what, a decade? 18 years, I said, and I'm afraid this isn't a social call. Within minutes, the old rhythm returned. am asking direct, precise questions, me answering with timestamps and file names. I sent him the folder through encrypted email. When he saw the attachments, he whistled softly. This is textbook fraud. And it's family. You okay? I looked at the glow of my laptop. The screen was dimming, but the light still reached me, a pale reflection on my face. I'm fine, I said. I've spent my life catching other people's accounting errors. Turns out, I just had to audit my own family. He chuckled, a sad sound. You always did love your spreadsheets. It'll do, I said. We went over next steps. The notarized statement, the backup copies, the financial history that would prove I wasn't dependent or impaired. Every move laid out like formulas in a workbook. Clean, unarguable, elegant. When we hung up, it was almost dawn. The first light crept through the blinds, pale and blue. The world outside was waking, unaware that something irreversible had shifted in my small apartment. I leaned back, watching the sunlight climb across the cracked screen, splitting it into shards of gold. The laptop hummed softly, a sound I'd come to love, the sound of proof existing. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady. No more begging for understanding. No more trying to explain what I felt. Feelings could be dismissed. Data could not. I spent the next 2 days cataloging everything. Emails, bank records, old wire transfers, mortgage statements, anything that tied my money to my name. I built color-coded sheets with hyperlinks to each file, arranged by date, witness, and relevance. Rows, columns, logic. It was beautiful, in its way order born out of betrayal. When my son called that week pretending to check in, I listened to his careful voice, the one he used when rehearsing honesty. Mom, how's the new place? Lovely, I said. Lots of light. Oh, great for growing things. He hesitated. You're not lonely, are you? I smiled at the irony. Not anymore. He didn't know that while he spoke, his own emails sat neatly archived in my drive digital fossils of greed. After he hung up, I opened my spreadsheet again, watching the formulas align. The satisfaction was strange but clean. For the first time in months, my hands didn't shake. It struck me then. Justice isn't a courtroom or a confession. It's a sum that finally balances after years of being shortchanged. And when that balance appeared in neat black numbers across my screen, I whispered to the laptop, the truth of it all. I no longer look for justice in tears, only in the cells of an Excel sheet. Once I'd seen their plan in black and white, something inside me clicked back into place. It wasn't rage, not even grief. It was the clean, familiar rhythm of problem solving. The same feeling I used to get when an impossible spreadsheet finally balanced after a long night. I printed a fresh notebook label, Project Rebalance. It sounded like a company, but at that point it was just an idea and a kitchen table. The concept came to me one evening as I watched an online support group for older women. So many of them spoke the same sentence in different voices. My children said I was losing it. Each story was another version of mine. Retired mothers, widows, women who had signed away houses for convenience and found themselves sleeping on couches. I started reaching out. A bookkeeper from Wisconsin, a retired banker from Georgia, a real estate assistant from Nevada. We met on video calls every Thursday night, the screen a mosaic of weary faces that grew brighter as we talked. What if, I asked one evening, we took our skills and helped each other instead of apologizing for existing? A pause, then applause, nervous laughter. Hope disguised as sarcasm. That's how Rebalance was born. Each of us contributed what we could, expertise, a bit of savings, endless determination. We specialized in financial literacy for women over 50, auditing personal accounts, uncovering hidden transfers, and teaching how to guard their assets. I handled the data infrastructure. The others handled outreach. My laptop, the old silver one, became the headquarters. The crack on the screen ran like a scar through our shared spreadsheet, ugly but honest. When we registered the domain name, I filled in the founder line without hesitation, Evelyn Grant. It felt strange seeing my name in that space again, unqualified by retired or dependent. But Rebalance wasn't just therapy, It was preparation. Because while I was teaching other women how to protect what was theirs, I was also gathering proof of what my son had taken from me. Every business leaves fingerprints. Irregular transfers, shell invoices, inconsistent tax filings. I had access to most of his old ledgers from the days when I helped organize his accounts. They were sloppy. He'd always been better at talking than at counting. One Saturday afternoon, I spread the files across my table like a war map. Bank statements, expense reports, donation receipts that didn't add up. I began tracing lines of numbers the way other people read confessions. Within hours, the pattern appeared: diversions disguised as consulting fees, charitable write-offs that looped back into his personal accounts. My son wasn't just greedy, he was careless. I documented everything, each sheet cross-referenced by date, supported by scanned checks and emails. If anyone ever doubted my mental clarity, these pages would stand as my testimony. Still, part of me hesitated. Turning him in meant cutting the last thread between us. But the truth was, that thread had already frayed beyond repair. One evening, I joined our usual rebalance meeting and told the women the broad strokes. No names, no details. Just a story about a son who thought his mother's money was community property. The retired banker, Joan, looked straight into her camera and said, "Then it's time to audit him." I smiled. That's exactly what I've been doing. It took me 3 weeks to compile the final report. 26 pages of summarized irregularities, formatted like any professional audit, signed only with initials. At the top, I wrote a single sentence: submitted in good faith to assist ongoing compliance review. I mailed the packet anonymously to the State Tax Bureau, using a small-town post office 2 counties away. Then I walked out, bought myself a cup of coffee, and watched a pair of teenagers argue about music at the next table. Life, I realized, keeps going even while justice travels through the mail. 3 months passed. During that time, Rebalance grew. We got our first paying client, a widow in Kansas whose son had forged her signature on a car loan. We fixed it. Then another woman from Ohio, facing eviction from the house she'd built herself. We helped her prove ownership. Every success felt like a quiet prayer answered. And then, one morning, I saw his name on the news. The ticker at the bottom of the TV screen scrolled too quickly, but I caught it. Local entrepreneur. Under federal tax review. His company's logo flashed next, bright blue, clean font. The same logo I'd helped design years ago. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just sat there, coffee cooling in my hands, the faint hum of my laptop filling the room. Later that day, my daughter-in-law called. Her voice trembled beneath its practiced calm. "Mom, did you hear about Michael? It's awful. They're saying there's been some mistake with the taxes." "Mistakes happen," I said evenly. "That's why people hire accountants." There was a silence, long enough to feel the weight of everything unsaid. Then she whispered, "You didn't do anything, did you?" I let the pause stretch before answering. "I'm retired, remember? Just an old woman who likes her spreadsheets." After she hung up, I turned the laptop toward the light. The crack across the screen shimmered faintly, dividing the reflection of my face in two. One half was the mother who'd once believed unconditional love meant silence. The other half, the one glowing through the fracture, was something new. Calm, precise, and entirely unafraid. For the first time in years, I closed my files without dread. I'd already sent what needed to be sent. The rest would take care of itself. They would call it investigation. I called it symmetry. Because the numbers had finally come full circle, and every line item balanced exactly where it should. 3 months later, when the audit notice arrived at his door, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt accurate. After all, I hadn't sought revenge in court or prayer, only balance. And the day the Bureau opened his file, balance was restored. The hearing room smelled of cold coffee and nervous sweat, the kind of air that's too clean, too official, the kind that makes lies dry up in your throat. Rows of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glare. At the front sat 3 auditors from the Financial Bureau, their faces unreadable, pens tapping against notepads. I sat quietly at the end of the long table, my silver laptop resting in front of me. It looked small, fragile even, compared to the gleaming devices everyone else carried. But its cracked screen caught the light like a scar that had learned how to shine. Across from me, my son sat stiff in a tailored suit that suddenly looked too expensive for the room. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. He nodded but didn't look up. When his eyes finally met mine, the color drained from his face. He hadn't expected me to be there. The lead auditor, a man with glasses too large for his face, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Grant, thank you for joining us today. I understand you were a former associate in the company's early years?" I folded my hands calmly. "That's correct. I handled much of the bookkeeping when it started. Would you mind sharing your insight into the discrepancies we've uncovered?" Before my son or his lawyer could object, I opened my laptop. The familiar hum filled the silence, softer than a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the tension. I reached into my bag, took out a small USB drive, and plugged it in. The screen flickered, alive again. My voice was steady. "I've brought copies of original ledgers, transfer histories, and reconciliation files from 2018 to 2022. They may help clarify where the missing funds went." The younger auditor leaned forward. "You have access to the original data?" I met his gaze. "I created the data." That earned a small ripple of murmurs. My son's lawyer straightened in his seat. "Mrs. Grant, I must advise that anything you've obtained after your resignation was obtained legally," I interrupted. "All of it was under shared access when I was listed as a financial consultant. These are backups. You'll find they match the files in your subpoena." The lead auditor gestured for me to continue. Clicked the trackpad. The projector displayed my spreadsheet across the wall, the columns bright as daylight. I'd color-coded everything: blue for payroll, green for charitable deductions, red for fraudulent diversions. "This," I said, pointing at the red section, "is where company funds began to funnel into personal accounts under fictitious vendor names. Each payment was justified by a service contract signed by the CEO, my son, Michael Grant." He flinched when I said his name. I went on, tone calm, clinical. "For every transaction, there's a mirror withdrawal within 72 hours into an offshore account. The pattern repeats 48 times over 3 fiscal years. Total misappropriated amount: $486,000. The younger auditor whistled softly. Michael's lawyer jumped in. "Those numbers are speculative. My client maintains these were approved bonuses and legitimate business expenses." I turned toward him, my expression almost gentle. "Then he won't mind if we compare signatures." "Tell me." I opened another file, scanned PDFs of his signed contracts. The last signature looked rushed, crooked, nearly unreadable. Then, side by side, I displayed the ones from official filings. Perfectly neat, identical strokes every time. I zoomed in. Notice how the crossbar on the T shifts upward in these later versions? A classic tell of mechanical tracing. Whoever signed these learned his handwriting, but not his pressure. The room stayed silent long enough for the hum of the lights to sound like thunder. Finally, the lead auditor said, "Where did you learn forensic signature analysis, Mrs. Grant?" I smiled faintly. 18 years in accounting. You pick things up." Michael's voice cracked for the first time. What are you doing?" I said. "This is insane. You're ruining me." I closed the laptop halfway and looked at him. "No, Michael, you did that yourself." "I'm just balancing the books." He pushed back his chair, face red. "You can't do this to your own son." I rose slowly, meeting his height. "You did worse to your own mother. And you called it business." The lead auditor interjected, firm. "Mr. Grant, please sit down." He sank back into the chair, chest heaving. His lawyer was whispering again, but I could tell even he was rattled. The numbers were too clean, the evidence too precise. I reopened the laptop and brought up the final tab, summary sheet. Rows of formulas glittered across the screen like an army marching in formation. "Everything you need is here," I told the panel. cross-referenced by date, vendor, and transaction ID. Each cell links to a corresponding document. Nothing's hidden. Not anymore. The lead auditor nodded slowly. It'll verify these. If your data checks out, Mrs. SBA, Grant, it will be invaluable to our investigation. I shut the laptop and slid the USB across the table toward him. Keep a copy. From the woman you all heard was losing her mind. My son's lawyer opened his mouth to object, but the auditor raised a hand. That won't be necessary. The meeting adjourned soon after. My son didn't look at me again. As he walked past, I caught a whiff of his cologne, the same one I'd bought him for his first job interview 15 years ago. Funny how scents can outlive love. Outside, the sky had darkened with a summer storm. Reporters gathered by the steps, cameras flashing, voices cutting through the air. Someone shouted. Mrs. Grant, are you related to the accused? Yes, I said, stepping into the light drizzle. I used to be. The next week, his company folded. Licenses revoked, assets frozen, partners fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The news networks ran the story for days. Local CEO, under investigation for tax fraud. Family rift at center of scandal. I didn't watch the interviews. I didn't need to. I'd already seen the look in his eyes when he realized I wasn't the frail old woman he'd been describing to everyone. A month later, I received an official letter from the Bureau. Dear Mrs. Grant, your cooperation and data contribution were instrumental in uncovering financial irregularities affecting multiple entities. We would like to offer you a position as a financial ethics consultant for the ongoing investigative task force. I read it twice before smiling. A consultant again. Not a mother begging for recognition, not a widow measuring her worth in allowances. But Evelyn Grant, professional. When I walked into the Bureau's office for the first time, the receptionist greeted me with respect. The walls smelled of toner and purpose. My new desk overlooked the city. On it sat a fresh notepad, a government-issue laptop, and a small brass nameplate. That evening, I placed the old silver machine beside it, like a relic and a witness. The crack across the screen glinted faintly in the fluorescent light. An intern passing by stopped and said, "That's ancient." Still works? I ran my fingers over the dented surface and smiled. Better than ever. He laughed, not understanding. I didn't explain. Later that week, during a staff orientation, one of the auditors from the hearing approached me. Mrs. Grant, he said, I wanted to thank you again. Your evidence was, well, it was flawless. Just good bookkeeping, I said. He chuckled. If everyone kept books like you, we'd be out of a job. I thought about that for a moment, then replied, maybe that's the goal. After the session, I stayed alone in the conference room, gazing out at the city lights reflecting off the glass towers. It hit me then, the strange symmetry of it all. The same hands that once scrubbed kitchen counters in my son's house were now signing off on financial audits worth millions. The same woman they called a burden was now the one rebuilding what their greed had broken. And the same laptop they'd thrown in the trash was now part of an investigation file that would be cited in future cases. I ran my thumb along the crack in the screen, the metal cool against my skin. They had forgotten something essential. That survival and intelligence come from the same root. You can crush a woman's pride, but not her precision. When people later asked me how it felt, I said the only truth I knew. They forgot that the woman who once scrubbed their floors also knew how to rebuild houses, stronger, steadier, and with locks only she held the keys to. That night, long after everyone in the bureau had gone home, I stayed behind. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't press down. It lifts, like clean air after a storm. Outside the window, the city shimmered under a thin drizzle, the streetlights turning the wet pavement into ribbons of gold. On my desk sat two laptops. The new one, sleek and spotless, humming with the smooth precision of modern machines, and beside it, the old silver one. Its cracked screen still glowed faintly, a bruise of light on the corner where the damage spidered out like a frozen flash of lightning. I didn't repair it. I never would. Some things should stay broken, just enough to remind you what it took to survive. I ran my fingers across the dented lid, tracing the shallow scratch where my name used to be engraved. The crack had grown slightly wider over the years, but the machine still worked, stubborn as I was. On its desktop, I'd kept one file open, a spreadsheet labeled Rebalance Legacy. The first row listed the names of women who'd joined our program since the audit: Joan, Martha, Yvonne, each one with a small note beside her name, how she'd been cheated, how she'd fought back, and how we'd helped her find her footing again. 73 names. 73 women who decided that being underestimated was the best disguise for starting over. Sometimes, they still wrote to me. Evelyn, my daughter apologized after 10 years. We won the case. I finally bought my own house. I'd read those messages in the mornings before work, coffee in one hand, the silver laptop warming the other. It had become my ritual of gratitude. The quiet acknowledgement that pain, if catalogued carefully enough, could become architecture. The bureau office had its own rhythm now. Young analysts passed me in the hall with polite nods. They called me Ms. Grant, a formality that once would have felt distant but now sounded like respect. Sometimes, I caught their eyes flicking toward the old laptop I carried between meetings. A few smiled at it like an inside joke. "Can't believe that antique still runs," one of them said once. "It runs because I never gave it permission to quit," I replied, and he laughed, thinking I was joking. He didn't know the half of it. Every so often, my son's name still appeared in small print headlines. Court hearings, settlements, the slow disassembly of what used to be his empire. I didn't click the articles, didn't save them. The story no longer belonged to me. It was just data now. Case closed, balance restored. But sometimes, when the office went dark and my reflection merged with the city lights, I saw his face again. Not the man in the courtroom, but the boy in Spider-Man pajamas, standing in the doorway saying, "Mom, you're so good at this. I'll buy you your own office someday." And in a way, he had, not with money, but with the fire his betrayal lit under my feet. I whispered to the empty room, "You kept your promise, Michael. I got my office." The hum of the old laptop answered me, a soft vibration under my palms. On the wall above my desk hung the framed letter of appointment from the Financial Bureau. Below it, a single sticky note I'd written to myself months earlier. "Keep every receipt, especially the invisible ones." I smiled. That note had guided every choice since. The proof, the paper trail, the self-respect recorded in measurable units. The night deepened. Rain began again, tapping the glass in a rhythm that reminded me of typing, the kind I used to do at 2 a.m., when I thought I was working for love instead of recognition. I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked at the top like a heartbeat waiting to begin. I typed the first line without thinking. "Brigham isn't clean. It's cracked, smudged, and held together by whatever light leaks through the breaks." I didn't know if it would become an article, a memoir, or just another file saved among hundreds. It didn't matter. Writing had become my way of reconciling debits and credits of the soul. I saved the document under a new name, After. Balance closed. Then I leaned back and watched the silver machine glow against the dark. That crack, once an emblem of shame, had turned into something else entirely. Proof of endurance. The younger Evelyn might have tried to polish it away, make it presentable. The woman I'd become knew better. Some scars were meant to stay visible. They catch the light differently, and that difference is how you know you're still alive. When I finally shut the laptop, the screen faded slowly, as if reluctant to sleep. I whispered, "Rest, we've earned it." The city outside pulsed with quiet movement. Cars passing, a bus braking, someone's laughter echoing off the wet street. Life kept its rhythm, indifferent and beautiful. I sat there a moment longer, the ghost of the laptop's glow still reflected in the window, framing my face in a soft halo of light. For the first time in years, I felt whole, not flawless, but complete in the way a mosaic is. Every broken piece arranged into meaning. The old laptop still shone, even with its fractured screen. I never fixed it, because it reminded me that sometimes you have to crack to let yourself come back together again, Not polished, but truly whole. 1 year later, the world looked different, less polished, more honest. The air outside smelled of spring and printer ink, the kind of scent that lingers in freshly painted offices where something new is beginning. The sign on the glass door read, Rebalance Institute, Financial Empowerment for Women. Below it, in smaller font, but by Evelyn Grant. It was a modest space, 2 rooms above an old bakery on the corner of Maple and 3rd. The floors were scuffed, the blinds uneven, and the ceiling fan made a small clicking noise when it turned. But it was mine. Every chair, every coffee mug, every spreadsheet projected onto the wall was paid for with work I'd done using the same hands once dismissed as idle. The first morning, I came in early to unlock the door. The hallway still smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls from downstairs. On my desk sat the silver laptop, a little dimmer now, but still alive. Next to it, a small engraved nameplate, Evelyn Grant. Founder. The words looked heavier in metal than they had in my imagination. I ran a finger along the edge, tracing each letter, grounding myself in the simple, solid truth of it. By 9 o'clock, the first class had gathered, 8 women, all over 50, all carrying the same kind of quiet exhaustion I once wore like perfume. Some clutched notebooks. Others just held onto their handbags as if afraid to set them down. I saw myself in every one of them. We started small. I asked each of them to introduce themselves not by what they'd lost, but by what they still knew how to do. It took a while. People aren't used to defining themselves without apology. I used to run payroll, one woman said shyly, until my son said I should rest. I kept the books for our family restaurant, said another. Then my husband remarried the waitress. There was nervous laughter, thin but real. I told them, you're in the right place. Rebalance isn't just about numbers. It's about naming your worth and learning never to outsource it again. They nodded, eyes glinting with something between relief and disbelief. For the first few months, the program ran on borrowed chairs and stubbornness. We met twice a week, Tuesdays for budgeting and savings, Thursdays for digital skills. I taught them to track expenses, to read contracts line by line, to spot the small print that hides large betrayals. Sometimes, the lessons got emotional. Miss Evelyn, one woman whispered one evening after class, I don't know how to start over. My family has been managing my money for the past few years. Now that my account is empty, I'm scared. I placed my hand over hers. Fear's good, I told her. It means you're paying attention. The trick is to turn fear into math. Numbers don't lie. She cried a little, then laughed. I gave her an extra worksheet titled, How to Audit Your Own Life. Soon, word spread. Local women's centers started recommending us. A community college offered to host joint workshops. A reporter came by to interview me for the Sunday paper. She asked, what inspired you to start Rebalance? I thought of my old house, of the birthday party, the wine stain that refused to wash out. I thought of the courtroom silence and the spreadsheet that had saved my dignity. Simple, I said. I wanted to make sure no woman ever had to choose between love and literacy. The article ran with a photo of me at the front of the classroom, sleeves rolled up, standing beside the old laptop. The crack on the screen was visible even in print. They called it the machine that wouldn't quit. The next day, we received 30 new applications. One of them was from a name I recognized immediately. Sarah Grant, my daughter-in-law. Her email was short, formal. Dear Mrs. Grant, I recently left Michael. I'd like to enroll in your financial independence program, if you'll have me. I read it twice, feeling a strange stillness bloom inside. The younger me might have deleted it out of pride. But the woman who'd built this institute understood that closure sometimes comes disguised as enrollment. So I wrote back, of course, Sarah. Class starts Thursday. Bring a calculator. She came. Sat in the back row, quiet, taking notes. When she looked up, our eyes met for a second. No anger, just recognition. I let her stay. Everyone deserves to learn. By the end of the first year, Rebalance had trained over 100 women. Some found jobs. Others started small bookkeeping businesses. A few simply learned how to open their own bank accounts for the first time. On our anniversary, the team threw a small celebration. They brought cake store-bought, frosted unevenly, and decorated the office with paper banners. One of the younger volunteers stood up and said, "To Mrs. Grant, the woman who proved that balance sheets can heal hearts." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. When the room quieted, one of the students raised her hand. "Q Evelyn," she asked, half teasing, "Ko Kyun Sing, Nji Tagui Ko, La Q La Kyun Bam Kong." The room fell silent, waiting. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "No," I said, my voice steady and amused. "Because these days, they're the ones standing in line hoping for a job at the company of that so-called freeloader." Laughter rippled through the room, bright and contagious. I could feel it settling deep inside me, not as revenge, but as release. After everyone left, I stayed behind. The sun was setting, streaking the blinds with gold and dust. I sat at my desk, the silver laptop glowing softly beside the new office computer. The nameplate caught the last light of the day. Evelyn Grant, founder. I opened the laptop one last time for the night. The familiar crack in the screen split my reflection down the middle. One half the woman who'd been dismissed, the other, the woman who'd learned to rise through data and dignity. I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet thank you to the younger me who'd refused to stop typing, to the women who'd trusted me, to the broken machine that refused to die. Outside, the bakery lights flicked off one by one, and the streets settled into calm. I watched the glow of my office sign reflected faintly in the window. Rebalance Institute. For years, people had measured me by what I'd given away. Now, they measured me by what I'd built. And as I turned off the last light and locked the door, I felt the weight of freedom not as triumph, but as balance restored. Because maybe that's all freedom really is, not winning over anyone, but finally standing on equal ground with yourself. I looked back one last time. The cracked laptop still gleamed faintly in the dark, like a quiet heart that refused to stop beating. "They once called me a freeloader," I whispered to it, smiling. "Funny these days, they call me founder." The lights in the recording room were soft, warm, the kind that made even old scars look like wisdom instead of wounds. We'd been filming for an hour. My story, the women's stories, the birth of Rebalance. The young producer kept wiping at her eyes behind the camera, pretending to fix the focus. When she gave me the cue for the final take, I sat a little straighter, smoothed the wrinkles on my sleeve, and looked directly into the lens. The red light blinked on. For a moment, I saw my reflection in the glass gray hair, steady gaze, the faint outline of the old silver laptop glowing behind me on the desk. Then I started to speak. People used to call me a freeloader. They said I'd outlived my usefulness, that my worth ended the day my paycheck did. For a while, I believed them. I believed I was nothing more than a burden wrapped in good intentions. Until one night, I picked up what they'd thrown away and realized it still worked. I paused, a small smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. If someone ever tells you that you're useless, thank them. Truly. Because those words will teach you what every invoice, every bank statement, every balanced account already knows. Value doesn't disappear. It just changes owners. And you can always reclaim it. The room went completely silent except for the hum of the camera. I leaned closer, my voice low, the way I used to talk to my students at the institute when a lesson mattered more than the math. Don't let anyone else audit your worth. Not your children, not your spouse, not society. The numbers you've carried in your bones, the hours, the care, the sacrifices, they add up to something immense. You just have to start counting them yourself. I gestured toward the laptop on the table. I rebuilt my life with this old machine. The same one they threw in the trash. Maybe your version isn't a laptop. Maybe it's a sewing kit, a recipe book, a pair of gardening gloves. Whatever it is, pick it up. Start again. The future is just another spreadsheet waiting for your name at the top. The producer gave me a small nod to keep going. If this story found you today, it's not by accident. Maybe you're sitting in a kitchen gone too quiet, or staring at a phone that never rings, or wondering when exactly you stopped being seen. And listen carefully, you're still here. And that means your balance sheet isn't closed yet. You still have one more line to write. Maybe the one that finally tilts everything back in your favor. I smiled again, softer now. Share this story. Maybe it will reach another woman who's been called a burden. Maybe it'll remind her that she was once the one who kept the lights on, the meals cooked, the bills paid. Let her remember she built more than a home. She built endurance. I took a breath, steady, sure. Because freedom isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause. It comes the moment you stop asking permission to exist. I sat back in the chair. The producer whispered. Perfect. Just one last line. Mrs. Grant, a closing in your own words. I looked into the camera again, thinking of every late night, every spreadsheet, every click that turned pain into proof. Then I said, slowly, clearly, my story ends here. But who knows? Maybe this is the first reckoning of your own freedom. The red light on the camera went out. The room exhaled. Behind me, the silver laptop screen dimmed, its cracked corner catching the last bit of studio light still glowing, still alive. I reached over, closed it gently, and whispered the only line that ever truly balanced the books. They called me a freeloader. But it turns out, I was just investing in my comeback.